Greetings and welcome to this second presentation in the six semesters of the Emerald Choral Academy. I am Gary Cannon, the artistic director of the Emerald Ensemble, a professional choir based in Seattle. The Emerald Choral Academy is a series of interactive webinars during which our area's leading professional choristers reveal their personal tricks of the trade to community singers. These webinars are then made freely available to singers across the world via YouTube. The Emerald Ensemble acknowledges that we operate on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We aim to honor with gratitude the life itself and the land itself and the life of the Duwamish tribe. This presentation is funded in part by a grant from the Washington State Arts Commission, in addition to the National Endowment for the Arts, For Culture, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and many generous donors. We encourage anyone participating in or viewing this webinar to make a donation as you are able at emeraldensemble.org. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our mailing list to hear about future sessions of the Academy and the other activities of the Emerald Ensemble. This webinar is being recorded. By participating, you are granting the Emerald Ensemble permission to share your contribution. That said, your microphones and cameras will remain off for the duration of the presentation. You can, fortunately, ask questions to the presenter by typing into the chat or Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. Periodically, then, I'll interject to field your questions. I'm joined here by two remarkable souls. First by Scott Kovacs, the executive director of the Emerald Ensemble, he who devised the Academy and keeps it moving along. Also is today's instructor, who is one of our favorites, the inestimable baritone Ryan Bede. Have you ever been called inestimable before? Or that's not...
I certainly haven't. Thank you, Gary.
You can add it to the quotes list.
It's going in the bio this evening.
Yeah, exactly. Ryan has sung with Seattle Opera, Opera Idaho, Nashville Opera, and other organizations near and abroad. When he lived in the Tacoma area, he taught at Seattle Pacific University and the University of Puget Sound. And he's now based outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Ryan's topic today is Vehicular Warm Ups. I'm looking forward to this one. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Scott. And thank you to everyone who is able to join us this evening. And also will have the chance to watch this as a recorded presentation afterwards. I'm delighted to be back with the Emerald Choral Academy for another presentation after finishing several in our vocal anatomy series. We move on this evening to talking about strategies to help you begin your warm-up process for a rehearsal or even performance that you may be participating in at the tail end of said commute. So I will be sharing my screen so I can show you my presentation slides. And like Gary said, we will have some time for Q&A. So go ahead and put those into the chat or into the Q&A as you like, and we will with that, we will embark on our journey together this evening. So before we go through our vocal warm-up, this is important anytime you embark on using your voice. We need to sort of reorient ourselves and check in with some things that aren't maybe directly related to the practice of singing. I thought I would start this evening by reminding us of a few of my favorite paradigms and truths about us as singers. The first, I say that a singer is an athlete in that in the sport, the activity of singing, it's one that involves our entire body. You know, whether when we're talking about athletic events, whether we're talking about a sprinter or a thrower in track and field, or a baseball player or a basketball player or a cheerleader or a ballet dancer or any of these types of things, even though there may be a principal part or parts of the body that are used to execute the sport in question, that athlete's whole body is involved in that event, and the coordination of various structures and muscles plays into their sports just as it does to ours. One of my favorite adages to share with my students often is that the voice is one of the only instruments, save maybe a large piano, that you can't take, just take the trumpet off your face and put it back in the case at the end of the day, or put away your clarinet or put away your saxophone or something like that. We carry our instrument with us through every moment of our daily life, and we don't really ever get to separate ourselves from it. So to that end, it's very, very important that we take care of our instrument that is our body. Okay, when it comes to athletes, they're constantly training through strength and through cardiovascular exercise to increase their performance of their sport, but also to prevent injury and preserve the health and well-being of their bodies. Because without that, they certainly can't take part in the activity that they have, perhaps even attained fame to have done. So it's really no different for us as singers. I really, really gravitate back to the word intentional a lot in my life. In teaching, in performing, it has so much applicability to many facets of life, but really, for singing, it's going to come up several times in the next hour or so. The idea of sort of just compartmentalizing our time for singing, whether we're in a rehearsal, whether we're in a performance, whether we're in individual practice or reflection of a rehearsal, performance, or practice, just really setting aside that time and being intentionally focused on the matter at hand is very important. And just like a routine is important for any other job or activity that we might do, your daily routine as a singer is really, very, very much something that you can design the exact same way. We think about things like rest and hydration. I always say that those are the two indispensable things when it comes to singing. You may get off your sleep schedule for a night or two, but if you've been hydrating your body well enough, that the toll that takes on your vocal health might not be as much. You also may, have less hydration, or from weather or environment or other considerations, your hydration is down. But if your rest is at or above your normal threshold, you also may experience, very little or no change in your vocal efficiency. However, if you start subtracting from your hydration and subtracting from your rest, you're drawing from a bank that does not auto refill. So it's very important to keep those two things in mind, and also in realizing that our bodies are our instruments. Every choice that we make, from particular foods that you might eat, spicy, sour, salty, too much sugar, the list goes on, dairy, we've talked about in several past presentations, some sensitivities that might come from dairy foods and how that might affect your singing. Whatever it is that you can do to help preserve your voice, your instrument that's living inside your body, we want to concentrate as much as we can on those things. We really invest a lot of our time and a lot of our effort. Many of us in the room, presenter, organizer, and guests alike, have perhaps spent several academic degrees, if not academic degrees, perhaps decades of choral experience years pouring into our voice. And in that way, it really is something that you have richly invested in for whatever length of time you have been active in singing. So it really it really should enrich your outlook of singing and be inspirational to you that you can take such good care of this structure inside your body that that takes such good care of you and allows you to to sing and bring joy to yourself and to others. Every one of us is going to need different things for our voice. I'm acquainted with many singers whose daily warm-up routine consists of anything from a very regimented, you know, gentle warm-up in the shower in the morning, a certain amount of water intake before they open their mouth and start making vocal sounds. Whatever it is that you need takes a little bit of discernment, but once you zero in on those things that make you feel like you can be vocally at your best, those are the things to hold on to. Now, this evening, we're going to be talking about warming up in your vehicle or in your commute to rehearsal. It could be on a walk. It could be on your bicycle. I'm a cyclist myself. I would love to be able to commute to more rehearsals on my bicycle. Usually the release hour of 9 or 10 o'clock at night is a bit prohibitive in the bike commuting back and forth to rehearsal, but I suppose you could be going on your bike just as well. We'll talk about warming up the voice just like you warm up any other muscle, but we throw around these words of what is a warm up and what's a vocal exercise in the vocal pedagogy, voice pedagogy realm of study. There are words like vocal function exercises thrown around, and sometimes we struggle to separate what is really part of your warm up and what is intentional voice building in between, like things that you would do in your practice session that really are steps towards the eventual building of your voice at its full potential. They really need not be, you don't need to have a list of exercises that are only for warm up and a list of exercises that are only for, building in your practice session, but there will be specific purposes to the exercise we talk about this evening, and they won't always fall into that function exercise and improvement process that you might do in another practice session. My goal this evening is to give you some quick things to focus on. You may have 15 minutes available on this commute. Traffic may give you 65 minutes to focus on this commute. In one way, in no way will this routine take you 60 minutes. So you can do it in a total of 15 or 20 minutes if you need to, depending on your situation. So before we deal with our physical body, things that we can put a hand or some sort of awareness on, we're going to talk about focusing first our brain. Brain science and its applicability to music and motor learning are two of the hottest topics right now in the scientific study of how our brains receive, learn, practice, and perform music. So I am going to suggest that you begin your process with a 3 to 5 minute session of time before you turn the key and start your car. That turn the key metaphor is one I often use in talking about the way that we begin the vocal process, the phonation process. But before you go anywhere, before your attention needs to also be, of course, on the road and your driving and the driving of others, which is of course very important. I will mention that several times this evening, but I'm not at all overlooking the fact that, of course, we need to be intentional about safety while we're driving and pay close attention. One of the main reasons why I suggest we do this before we turn the key and start worrying about anything with the car. But I like to think about the act of getting into your vehicle and closing the door. And when you close the door, you have the opportunity to sort of close out the things that, some of the things that have been a part of your day or part of your week or whatever it is that would be best set aside for the time that you are concentrating on your warm up and your rehearsal or performance, and as we will talk about later, your cool down as well, just to leave all of those things, as many of those things as you can, outside of the vehicle. One of my favorite visualization exercises I often do with my students in the studio. I will open the blinds if there are blinds on the window, and as I'm talking to them, I just encourage them to just sort of take in some of the sights that are around us. Sometimes those things are in the studio, sometimes they're out the window, whatever it may be. Just to as we have our several minute check in at the beginning of a lesson, I'll just have them take in some of what's around them. And I'll encourage you to do the same thing in your car, right? So, take a as much of a 360 degree view as we can. You can choose to do this activity with your eyes open the whole time. You can take in your surroundings and then close your eyes and try to paint yourself a picture. Sometimes I really enjoy doing that. But what you want to do here is in this list here, there are five steps, and in descending order, we're going to do one fewer for each of these. So you'd like to try to think of 5 things that you can see if your eyes are open, things that you can directly see if your eyes are closed. Maybe there are things that are actually there. Maybe there are things that you could add to this picture if you were designing it. And then you may try to find 4 things that you hear. Identify 3 things that you might smell. You could reverse these 2 if you want. Sometimes I do 3 touch and 2 smell, or 3 smell and 2 touch. It really just sort of depends on where you are, right? And then the last one, I reserve taste, right? Because if we have a drink in our hand or a piece of food, or there's something in the room, or we see somebody, enjoying their, lunch or snack, that might be easy to do. But this is the trickiest of the 5. So I always leave that one in the last position. But it just helps you really center your brain on the situation at hand. And yes, we haven't really entered the realm of directly for singing, but the good news is that happens next. I also, after doing that visualization, I will spend a bit of time myself reflecting on some prior rehearsals or practice sessions. Many choirs rehearse once a week for the entire season. And in the case of maybe some of you are in church choirs, and you have one rehearsal evening a week and then one day a week that you share in worship. Or if you're a project-based choral singer, where you might have 3 rehearsals in a week or in 2 weeks, and then 2 concerts, or whatever it is, you have the opportunity to reflect on the last time you used your voice in things that are applicable to this rehearsal. I really like to encourage recording yourself when you practice. It can be a hard thing to become used to hearing one's own voice on recording. I share with students very often that what we hear while we're speaking or singing is different, of course, from what we hear when we listen to a recording of ourselves speaking or singing. Not so many people have home answering machines, I guess, anymore, but we have voicemail on our phones. Same thing. If you've ever left a voicemail message for someone else and then gone back and heard what you sound like, to your ears, it doesn't sound the same as it did when it was coming out of your mouth. And then, of course, a third different perspective on the sound that's coming out of your mouth is that of your listener, your voice teacher, your coach, your conductor, your audience member. That's one of the greatest cases I make for the need for vocal coaches and vocal teachers throughout one's musical life, is for that outside set of ears that you can't, no matter what you do, you cannot replicate that perspective. Also, another idea I like to suggest is keeping journals of your practice sessions. Reflect after a rehearsal, as something that you can then look back on the next time. Refresh some things that went well, maybe a few challenges you had. A number of my singing colleagues, I remember from opera chorus rehearsals, would keep their phone or other recording device on their music stands right in front of them. So you were picking up a bit of the room, everything that was going on in the ensemble, but more than anything, you would be picking up your voice, and you would hear, you would hopefully hear lots of places where you felt like you really hit the nail on the head and you sang those passages spot on. And there may also be, of course, some spots that you still need some more work on. And as I in earlier part of my life as a football player, and often our practices would be recorded by a camera that was up on a lift, and the adage was often the eye in the sky don't lie, right? You know exactly what is going on by hearing that recording. So that's just a few ideas for some pre-singing activities. We'll go through one more slide, and then I would really like to stop and see if there's any questions up to this point. I'd like to bring up our next topic now, which is the idea of, if we think of our voice as a well-apportioned and furnished home, where everything that the activities of the family that inhabit that home, it's no different from the activities of the voice that inhabits your body. So if we're talking about a house, it's built on a frame, right? And our framework for our singing instrument is the posture and alignment of our body, right? We have limited control of the bone structure that the good Lord gave us, but what we can be in control and guard of is how we apportion our body for our singing activity. So many of the things that we strive for, good intonation, healthy phonation, good resonance, blend with other singers because of the way that we're hearing and sensing the pitches around us. All of these things rely very heavily on your posture and alignment. If you're, I'm sure we've all been told, sit at the edge of your seat with your folder up, at a certain height that you can see your music and also see over it, so you can see the encouraging eye of your conductor. That's more than just for the being in the right attentive state. It's the posture and alignment of your instrument. When we're sitting, we have to think more from the tip of your head basically to your hips, right? Because the lower part of your body is not quite as active at that time. But like I said, we can talk about intonation suffering with poor posture or alignment, and that is what I mean here by two different types of flat. There's flat of pitch, where the actual frequency, the number is lower than it ought to be to stay in unison with other voices or to match the tuning of the instruments that are accompanying us. But there's also flat of timbre as well. The way that your sound is resonating, structures within the articulatory part of our mechanism, the resonant part of our mechanism can really suffer if our body alignment is not proper. And as we will go forth with in just a moment when we talk about breath specifically, the way that you inhale and exhale your breath is also very heavily reliant on posture. Okay? The idea of stand down, right? Stand up from the waist up while you're sitting, right? This is something you can think about in your car, right? I also encourage you, I'm a pretty tall individual myself, so in many cars I have to be creative of how I have my lower body underneath the dash and whatnot. But you want to look for a knee position that's not spread way out or knocked together, because that directly affects your hip posture. We can all remember back to driver's education when they used to teach 10 and 2. I think maybe now they teach 9 and 3, but somewhere in there, think about that alignment of your shoulders. I don't mean necessarily having your hands out, but that alignment, that forward alignment of your shoulders is really important for efficient vocal use as well. Um, I'm going to borrow a concept from an Alexander technique teacher who I was fortunate to take a workshop with several years ago. She's at the University of Alaska Anchorage. Her name is Mari Han, and she was talking to us about visualizing your head. Do you visualize your head as a chin head, or do you visualize your head as a nose head? And what we mean by this is that at the back of the head here, where your skull attaches to the cervical part of your spine, that hinge, if we want to call it there, if you put your hands on the back of your neck here, right, kind of in the lower end of your hairline, and you just on purpose nod your head up and down, but use your chin to really lead, you can feel the back of those neck muscles really engage. Now, be in touch with those muscles for another moment, and then draw your head up and down a few times, thinking about leading with your nose. You notice how much less tension happens in the neck? Okay? I'm sure we've all heard from coaches, voice teachers, conductors that things like when you're rising to higher notes, you don't want to lift up your chin, right? You are actually adding all kinds of tension to the other parts of your vocal mechanism and upper sort of torso and up when you add that sort of tension. And if you can, just take a few moments and call attention to that arrangement of the way your head is situated on your neck, similarly to how we will envision our whole body joint upon joint upon joint stacked together to find our sense of good posture. It's very hard to do, extreme motions like the, reach for the sky and pick apples and all those things that we've done at the beginning of vocal practice sessions or rehearsals. But one thing that you can do is just sort of take your seated self and twist a few times, in your torso, and just feel, your oblique muscles on the two sides of your abdomen engaging and stretching, while one stretches, one contracts and retracts, and the opposite is true on the other side. And that just helps us in feeling a little bit less tension in our sitting posture in the car. Call attention to each joint, shake out your fingers, shake out your wrists, I like to use the word liberate and release a lot. Like, think about your elbows kind of releasing. Take a few shoulder rolls. Take your webbed hand, web spread out hands and put them on your ribs and feel those ribs spread apart as you take a breath or two. Just think about releasing. And maybe each time you're in the car, you focus on some different parts and different releases that you might do. It's all helpful. I love that about many exercises that we do pertaining to our voice. You're not going to do yourself any harm by doing these things. So you can feel free to really let your what your body needs be in charge of your choices as you do this. Liberate, allow, release. These are great words to think about when we're talking about singing, because it takes some of the focus away from manipulating something that we think we have to create, rather than allowing something to happen. And before we take a few questions, or at least give the opportunity to do so, it's just I don't even actually at the moment remember what movie it came from. It was a comedy movie in my a little bit younger days, and there was one person said to the other, rule number 76, no excuses, play like a champion. What I wanted to include this for is that we get to take the greatest pride in what we're doing with our vocal use all the time, and it's really a pleasure to get to do it, and I hope you see it that way as I do. So there's our little funny quote for now. So Gary, let's take a moment in case there are any questions.
We have no questions as yet, but I would encourage any folks present, if you happen to know what movie that comes from, go ahead and type it in, and we'll update the world.
I hope it, I was thinking about it. I hope it was, not some just, frivolous thing I watched when I was in, college or something like that, but it might be.
There's nothing wrong with frivol.
Certainly not.
Let's go on ahead. Thanks, Ryan.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So when we've talked in, maybe you've been with us for some of the vocal anatomy series, or certainly I've heard this reference to the vocal process being divided into steps or systems before. And the first one of those systems is the respiratory system, which we talked about at length for an entire presentation. But today we'll just be talking about some specific things that you can do in your vehicle as you prepare to embark on your rehearsal journey. I wanted to remind you, or maybe let you know if this is the first time you're hearing, that when it comes to the muscles we use for inhalation as opposed to exhalation, there's much less muscle engagement involved in inhalation than there is in exhalation. So that's all the more case to thinking about allowing the breath, right? Because it's kind of like, you pull air from outside. Say you pull outside air into a syringe, right? When there's a little bit of air in there, there's a small amount of air in there and it's under greater pressure. As you draw that syringe back, there becomes a larger amount of air in the syringe, and it generally gets easier to pull that plunger back, right? So that's the idea of one of my teachers and mentors who I respect very much, Dr. Kari Reagan, always refers to this as nature abhors a vacuum, right? So we're talking about increasing the volume inside our lungs in this case. But that air is under less pressure until we choose to use it. And that's why I use the descriptor of active exhalation, because that's what we're doing when we're singing, is actively choosing how we're going to expel the breath that we've taken in. When you breathe in, really only your diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles, the outside muscles on your ribs. And if you need an analogy for this, it's kind of like you're sticking your hand in your pocket, sort of your waist pocket on that same side. The internal intercostals, which are more actively part of the exhalatory process, it's kind of like you're doing a cross draw in an old Western movie, right? That would be your holster on the other side. Those muscles, attach in one way to the sternum and go outwards. The external ones, attach more on the outside and fiber towards the middle. The exhalation muscles are much more numerous. We have several in the abdomen, the rectus abdominis, which runs right down the middle, several others, but the idea of the fact that there's only two muscles really directly involved in inhaling makes it seem all the more simple a process. Now, there's a four-step method to the breath that sometimes we call the box method. The first step being taking in air, inhaling. The next step we refer to suspending the breath, not taking any more in, but not expelling any breath either. And if you can think about this process, the notion of keeping your glottis, your vocal folds open. So you're not holding your breath. That means not holding your breath also at your lips, but you're definitely not holding your breath by gripping and closing the glottis, right? We're just suspending at the top of the breath, not taking in any more or letting any out for several seconds. Then there's the exhale phase. And then we come to a rest or recoil phase. Another one of my favorite phrases that I use a lot is breathing to live and breathing to sing are two different things, right? So there's a little bit more rest and recoil in our daily breathing than there is in our singer's breath, because most of the time we're finishing that phrase and just taking a whole new breath in a nice, efficient way to move on with the music. Okay, so everybody feels breath differently. So some of us are going to feel lots of expansion in our lower back. Some people are going to feel quite a bit in their lower abdomen. Some of us are, that notion of spreading in the front of the sternum and really feeling that, kind of barrel chest type shape is really easy to identify. There are 4 different categories of breath. One is clavicular breath. That's that sort of dreaded shoulders up breath that we've all been discouraged from executing for as long as we've been singers. The next one down is a thoracic breath. If you take a only thoracic breath where you're breathing in just into the chest, it's kind of gasping, and you notice your abdomen pull in. That's a tactic of breathing, but not particularly ideal for singing. If we talk about an only chiefly abdominal breath, that would be one that doesn't expand your chest very much, but it really expands and creates a big drop in your abdomen. That's what we call abdominal breathing. And then there's that 4th category, which is the leaning of thoracic and abdominal breath on each other. The Italian word appoggio is something that many of you have no doubt heard. Appoggiare is to lean, right? You're also probably familiar with appoggiatura, right? A musical notation where one note leans on another one. We want those 2 types of breath or categories of breath to sort of coexist with each other. I do encourage you to, however, whatever your, body shape, size, build is, to have the feeling of release in your abdomen. And the idea of don't look too thin, don't keep your waistline too, tight and taut and sucked in and things like this. This is a time to release some of those muscles. You don't have to just let it all, let everything release, but really allow some space. The idea of breathing circumferentially all the way out. I like to use the analogy of if you were wearing a life vest, one that goes all the way around your torso, you'd want to kind of breathe into that all the way around. All right, now to our first actual exercise that we're going to do. It only took us this long to get here, but I promise it's been worth the wait. So this first exercise is one of the idea of panting. I mentioned an elephant, a cheetah, and a chihuahua, and here's the reason. First, you're going to start with a slow, deep pant. Kind of like if you can envision an elephant who's getting a little tired from running, but they got a real big body, right? So their pant is going to be really like, this is one time I would encourage you to make some audible breath sounds, right? We'll talk about in a few minutes. When you breathe for singing, you want to do the best that you can to do so without too much noise. But here we want to be okay with kind of making some of that panting noise. So start with some really deep panting. Tongue out is optional. Again, like I've said in past presentations, my camera's the only one on. So if you're trying this with your tongue hanging out, you're absolutely welcome to do that. Start by that slower tempo pant. Do a couple of those, maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds at a time. And then let's move on to the cheetah who's chasing after that elephant. So that animal's panting might be a little bit faster. Right? Maybe increasing in intensity as that cheetah gets closer to the elephant. And then perhaps this third animal, not usually seen in the African Sahara like an elephant and a cheetah might be, but let's pretend for just a moment that we're this tiny little full of energy chihuahua that's chasing for some odd reason after this cheetah. That panting is going to be much more like a much faster pant. Another way to think about this might be musical note values. Start, pick a nice easy tempo, and pant in half notes. Or if it's fast enough, maybe you want to pant in whole notes. I don't know. You take, sort of a choose your own adventure thing. But maybe if you're progressing from quarter note pants to eighth note pants just 16th note pants in a said tempo, you would also accomplish these three things. The next thing I'd like to encourage you to do is to think about taking a, I always sort of default in the 72 to 80 beats a minute range when I'm thinking about this, to take 2 beats of really nice, strong, round inhale. So you go like, try to take a nice, big, full breath in those 2 beats. And then we're going to hiss out over 4. So you go, and then let the breath go, rest and recoil, cleansing breath. Do it again. Do it 2 or 3 times with this, what we call 2x4 pattern. Then we'll increase it to 2x6, and then we'll increase it to 2x8. Take a nice, efficient 2-beat breath. Right? Do it over 8 counts. That's a nice way to pull some focus to just your breath. And then the last exercise on this page dates back to Manuel Garcia, who's one of the pioneers of modern voice science and the pedagogical understanding. Excuse me. It's 9:45 p.m. where I am, so pardon my slip there. Understanding of the voice. He was the first one to visualize the vocal folds with the right angle of mirror and start studying exactly what the behavior of those folds really was. He encouraged his students to do an exercise where they would breathe in for 4, they would suspend the breath for 4, and then they would breathe out for 4. And as the student became more proficient, he would increase them to 5 beats, 6 beats, 7 beats, 8 beats, and onward. He even writes of getting students all the way up to 10. Now, we talked before about, exhaling over 8 beats or something like that. And if it's on an S or a sh or something like that, you're letting the air out at a fairly slow speed. I encourage you to try this exercise and get yourself up to 8 beats. I promise you that 8 beats suspend in the middle of that breath feels like an eternity when you first start. But it's really, really excellent for your breath awareness, for your breath capacity, for your acknowledging that when you're taking a breath in over 8 beats, you want to do it gradually. You don't want to be essentially to most of your breath capacity by about beat 5 and then just to have to kind of, sip in little bits of air after that. You want to steadily take. That was 8 beats of consistent inhalation, right? And then you suspend for 8, and then you breathe out for 8, which also might feel like an eternity when you start. But just like any other, just like a runner who first runs, a half a mile and runs a half a mile every day for a week, and then runs a 1 mile, runs a 2/3 of a mile run and then drops back to half. And then after a while, you go to 2/3 and do your occasional mile and drop back. The mile run goes to 1 1/4 and drops back. You will train the muscles of your breath just like we train the muscles that are involved in running. Okay. Now we're on past our breath mechanism to making some sound. That's what we all want to do as singers, right? The phonation, the idea of creating the sound, is a combination of aerodynamics. At one point there was the theory that the Bernoulli effect, the draw of the same thing as if you have 2 pieces of paper next to each other and you blow air through and they come together. It was thought for some time that played had quite a bit of correlation and truth into how the vocal folds work. So that's what we would call aerodynamics. As the air blows by the folds, there's some natural draw of them together. But there's also movement in the laryngeal muscles that causes the folds to come together. We know from past study of registration and things like that, that we have muscles in charge of each, sort of in charge in different registers of our voice. So there's definitely, as is currently understood, a dual role of both muscular involvement and aerodynamics in the way that the folds come together. Now, our impression of the ideal choral sound aesthetic can sometimes play a role in creating a little bit more tension in our voice than is ideal. Just as an example, the idea of singing, early choral music, early polyphony, even chant, or even monophonic music, when this idea of straight tone, or a really plain tone, that could be accomplished, not ideally so, but it could be accomplished by too much tension in the folds themselves, which would lead to more fatigue and have that happen quicker. So just be aware that you want to focus your warm-up activities in such a way that doesn't try to make a certain sound, that sometimes your conductor may expertly guide you towards. We have wonderful conductors, like our very own Gary Cannon, and many others who are so in touch with their singers' proper vocal production in the way that they explain the sound that they want to have. They'll help you attain that sound while also retaining good vocal technique. But as you are warming up your voice, I also like to say, you are the curator and caretaker of your own voice, and it's very important that you take good care in that way. So let's talk about taking a finger and putting it right on your larynx, right on the top of your thyroid cartilage. For most gents, the Adam's apple is fairly prominent. You can find the top of that thyroid cartilage. Put a finger there and then yawn. Oh, you feel that whole larynx drops down, right? Oh, now we want to retain a fairly low laryngeal position for most classical singing. It's going to be a bit higher in much of the contemporary vocal stylings that are also practiced. But what's important is that the larynx always stays neutral. It's always movable. It's never stuck. You're not depressing your larynx by tensing up the mechanism, by depressing the back of your tongue or something like that. I have mentioned, I think, in previous sessions, that one of the unfortunate truths about the vocal mechanism is that there are muscles that, for instance, depress the jaw, but they also raise the larynx. So we have to be careful not to overdo the dropping of the jaw, because it might counteract these things that you're trying to do with your larynx, right? And now for a few exercises that you can do in the phonation department here. This SOVTE, this is semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. There are 13 SOVTE postures, as published by Dr. Ingo Tietze and a number of other researchers in an article. I can certainly provide the link to that if anybody would like to have that after this evening. But there are a total of 13 postures. We talk about a lip trill. We talk about a tongue trill, the rolled R. We talk about the labiolingual trill, or blowing a raspberry, which is like, right? These are 3 of these 13 postures. There are several hums that we'll talk about in a few minutes. There are some voiced consonants that are in this group that can be extended. There are some straw maneuvers. We'll talk a little bit more about straws. There are things that are happening in water. These are all excellent exercises because they take a little bit of the stress and emphasis off of the folds themselves. Think about it as a little bit of back pressure. Instead of putting all the force out, we're putting some force out, but we're also getting some kind of therapeutic back pressure happening. I mentioned the Peer Gynt theme here. And think with me for a moment of just that much. I hope you could hear that okay. I was playing it from my iPad keyboard. But think about that as a simple exercise that you might do on a lip trill. I played the G above middle C, which is G4, but I'll start in my baritone range from G3 and just think of now I was talking instead of taking a nice singer's breath right before I started that. So there's your encouragement to always make sure you take the right breath. But that particular exercise in that place in my voice, it's kind of in the lower middle of the voice to start. It doesn't even really extend in that key even into the passaggio. So it's a really, really nice therapeutic middle voice exercise to start. Started a few half steps lower. If you're, a lower voice, a little bit lower voice, you might start right about there, whether, even if you are a soprano or higher tenor. And then just maybe move up a few half steps as you execute that exercise. And then maybe choose another one of these postures that you didn't use for Peer Gynt. Now let's maybe do the tongue trill. And we'll do this 5-3, 4-2, 3-1, 2-7-1, 5-1. So this would go like okay, and we would go you could take one of your hands, keep one of those hands on the steering wheel. You could take one of those hands and take a check on your larynx, especially as you do the that your larynx is not rising super high and getting all tense. That's another exercise to do in a few successive half steps. And then we're going to use one that I refer to as the G exercise, right? Is about the most boring vowel sound, if we want to call it. This is the upside down V, kind of looks like a the most of a triangle if we're thinking in International Phonetic Alphabet symbols. And we'll use a G, 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 which is the back of your palate formed consonant. And whether you do 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 or 1, 3, 1, 3, 5, 3, 1, it doesn't matter so much. You might just do a very simple G, 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 or G, 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 G. Not yet really thinking about making that sound, right? Don't sing too much into these. It's about just making kind of the raw sound. If you could look at what the vocal folds look like and hear what they sound like without any sort of resonance, amplification or adding to the tone, it'd be a very boring buzz sound. So don't think about making too pretty of a sound yet. We don't very rarely want to make ugly sounds on purpose, but don't focus so much on making the most beautiful sound that you possibly can in this moment, okay? Once we move past the phonatory phase, we get into the other three systems, which are registration, head voice versus chest voice, heavy versus light mechanism, all these sort of things. And I see Gary popping up, and I think maybe we have a moment or two for questions. Am I right?
We have some great questions that I want to interject before we get too far away from their sources.
Please.
Firstly, the movie in questions was Wedding Crashers.
Oh, my word.
There you go.
Okay.
Now you have a reason to rewatch it. And I did a quick check. Cheetahs do not chase after and eat elephants.
Ooh, I'm going to have to change this exercise for nature accuracy.
Well, I mean, you did point out that Chihuahuas don't really chase after cheetahs much either, but they will only eat elephants if they're already dead and there isn't much else available to eat.
Okay.
So there we
Okay.
have it. That's yeah. Thank you for inspiring that bit of knowledge also to we have some great questions. Firstly, back to actually, I'll do this backwards. You were just talking about lip trills and such. Can you demonstrate again the difference between a lip trill and the raspberry exercise?
Of course, absolutely. So when you're lip trilling, you have your tongue placed behind your teeth, right? So we'll talk. We hear a lot about have your tongue kind of liquid behind your bottom front teeth, and when you're doing the lip trill, you want the tongue to be in that spot. Some people need a little bit of, you need to grab onto a little bit of the cheek here to get that to happen based on kind of, facial anatomy and all that sort of stuff. But that lip trill is just the lips moving. Whereas when we do the raspberry, we're actually allowing the tongue to come through the lips like that.
I love seeing somebody do that on a computer screen at close up. That's
And Zoom always does a nice job of just slowing it down just so that it looks really extra special. I know I've seen a lot of students do that. So
even with your when you're doing the gut exercise and facing the camera as you were and being able to see the machinations of your tongue, it was quite illustrative.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The question was asked too, if you have hints, and I may have a couple for this too, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Sure.
Hints for those who are impaired at doing lip trills.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know that doesn't come easy to everyone. I always encourage people as they try to grasp the idea of doing lip trills that you try it without sound first. You have to get to the point where you can go before you can. Essentially, what we're doing is adding a hum behind it. If you can't lip trill or it's not easy for you, it's equally as helpful to do a humming posture. So I'll mention this again here in a few minutes, but we can hum on an M as in majesty. We can hum on an N as in night or normal. We can hum on an NG as in you're ending the word hung. So you could easily do, and so on one of the hum postures if the lip trills are not so easy for you. My encouragement is to start without the sound as you try to develop that lip trill. The raspberry is successful for most people, I think, once you get past the fact that you might be, you know, you might want to put your hand up in front of your mouth if you're around anybody else.
But if you're in your
Once you get
car on the
past
way to
that moment,
rehearsal,
the raspberry works pretty well.
yeah, when you're driving, who really cares?
Nobody cares,
If the
right?
car next to you is saying, "Why are they giving their steering wheel the right of way?" One thing with lip trills that I found, if I can interject, I love that you offered different advice than I was thinking. I love getting different perspectives. And do jump in if I say anything that's inaccurate here.
Sure.
I find that there are two different ways that the lip trill tends to fall apart. One is when you're doing too much air, and one is when you're doing too little air. So if you're doing where it just kind of runs out, then you're letting too much air out, and so it can't. There isn't enough tension in the muscles to hold all that much air back.
Correct.
And on the other hand, the one that I tend to be guilty of is everything just stops because there's
Not
too
enough,
much tension in the lips, and so there isn't enough pressure in the air to push through.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes, I mean those are really good points, Gary. One of my part of my musical life was, in my, school years, I was a trumpet player, which to be a trumpet player of any development and skill, you rely on quite a bit of tension in that middle part of the lip to create that buzz. And even if you're a tuba player, you still rely on some of that, middle lip buzz, which really leans on these side corner muscles here being really, really, really strong and contracting quite a bit. You have to release those to lip trill, right? If you blow the air through there with the corners tensed, you do get the sort of brass buzz, kind of like sort of thing. You can't go and at the same time, right?
The lips don't work that way.
No.
But one last question. This
Sure.
backing up to the notion of posture, really, and
Mhm.
that act when you're first getting into the car and you feel the shoulder tension at the end of the day. How
Uh-huh.
do you go about dispelling that? There's shoulder rolls and things like that.
Mhm.
But do you have
Mhm.
any other tricks?
Well, one of my favorite things to do, and again, like I said, I'm a fairly tall individual. I can't always do this all in my car, but if you take your come up a little bit, you kind of assume the kind of hands together, sort of devout praying posture of certain ways, I suppose, and then just kind of bring your hands out, kind of now pretend like you've got yourself pressed up against a plate glass wall, okay? And then you just sort of drop your hands to your side. Your shoulders are going to be in, pretty much direct alignment. I talk a lot about not wanting either slouch or soldier pose when it comes to being a singer, you know what I mean? But by doing that kind of centering shoulder place, and then you can do a few, bring your shoulders up to your ears and hold them there and really, tense through your elbows and really pull up almost as if you were doing shrugs with dumbbells in your hands. But then you let your shoulders just drop to your sides. Imagine your 25, 30-pound dumbbells and shoulder roll those and then just let your arms drop to your side. I find that a lot of the time you can feel some of that shoulder tension release. Self massage is a great thing. Getting up into the side of your neck here, can be really helpful with that. Um, in Alexander, they call attention to several points in the shoulder, and then I've seen practitioners on a number of occasions just sort of let go, and the shoulder just drops into a position that looks way more relaxed than that person started with, and so much is about awareness and calling attention to a spot and just really direct. It's kind of like sitting in your chair as you probably are right now. And if I told you to just direct your attention to the bottom of your feet or direct your attention to the way your sit bones are on your seat, for a moment, you can call attention to your shoulders and just find that release.
Those are some great works for that and the great philosophy behind it. Thanks.
Sure.
Let's keep going into registration, etc.
Okay. So we're digesting quite a few topics on one screen. We've spent an entire presentation on each of these steps in the past. So this is just going to be some review and some application to the exercises that I suggest you do. So we have these notions of heavy versus light mechanism, chest voice versus head voice, full voice versus what do you call that other one? We hear terms like falsetto, we hear terms like mixed voice. We hear, the idea of head voice versus chest voice is a translation from Italian, voce di testa, voce di petto, right? So those words came from that. We also now, in our current understanding of vocal registration, talk about modes. We talk about a mode of voice that's the first. The first mode is a one of vocal fry, where it doesn't have much normal singing tone, we'll say it that way, more like a crackle, kind of like I'm not sure how well that came over, even coming over the microphone. So I hope you're actually hearing some sound when I do that. Think about just
It
going to
came
the
over. It was gloriously hideous. It came through.
oh yes, and really, this ought not to be a pretty sound. So I guess
Yeah,
mission accomplished if it was
exactly.
hideous. That is sort of the first mode. We call that, if we were gonna give it a number, that would get to be mode 0. Mode 1 is your chest voice, which is your thyroarytenoid dominant sound. That's the main muscle that runs through underneath the several layers of lamina propria in the vocal folds themselves. That's the main muscle that's in charge of your mode 1, your chest voice. The cricothyroid muscle is the main muscle that is most at work in your mode 2, in your head voice. When gentlemen go to their falsetto, there's really mostly passive thyroarytenoid activity. We have the CT muscle really doing the majority of that work. And now we know that the classical female voice focuses and functions very much head voice dominant, CT dominant, but that doesn't mean there isn't some TA involvement in there. And we'll talk about some more of those definitions here along the way. But our goal is the perception of a unified sound. The idea that we don't have to sing just because it's high doesn't mean it's loud. And for all the conductors in the room, I know I've heard many of you say just because it's louder doesn't mean it's going to get slower, right? Sometimes when we're having trouble keeping up to tempo, it's because we're keeping everything too tense and we're holding on too tight and things aren't free enough, right? So we're going to really work on not grabbing that much tension. But the idea of unifying our registers. And we can talk about all kinds of things like vowel modification and all those types of categories that we have not the time for this evening. But the idea of a siren or a train whistle sliding through your register. And if you're, whether you're a male voice or a female voice, starting in your spoken lower register in the lower end of your